Jasmine Reeves knew that in the high-stakes world of Atlanta real estate, silence was often more dangerous than a shouting match. But she had always believed that her brilliance was her armor. She thought that generating $50 million in revenue for the Hayes Family Trust was enough to buy her safety. That belief evaporated the moment she walked into her private executive suite and saw him. It was Richard Hayes, her stepfather, the man the city hailed as a tycoon and the man her late mother had warned her never to trust blindly. He was standing behind her mahogany desk, his silver-haired silhouette framed by the panoramic window overlooking the city they owned. He wasn't looking at the blueprints for her new development. He was looking for a weapon, and in his manicured hand, he held the one thing Jasmine had hidden deeper than any financial asset. It was her journal. A worn, velvet-bound book that did not contain business strategies, but the raw, agonizing timeline of how Richard had systematically gaslighted her mother into an early grave. Jasmine stopped in the doorway, her blood turning to ice. This was not a late-night visit from a proud father figure. This was an execution. She watched as Richard opened the book to a marked page, his eyes scanning her private trauma with a cold, predatory amusement. He looked up, and the smile on his face was not one of familial love, but of a hunter who had just found the kill shot. He held the journal up, the pages catching the dim office light. "You really are just like her, Jasmine," Richard said, his voice a smooth, low rumble that vibrated with malice. "Paranoid, emotional, unstable." He let the word hang in the air like a sentence. "The board cannot trust a woman who inherits her mother's madness. I think it is time we relieve you of your duties for your own mental health." Jasmine felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. He wasn't just firing her. He was planning to use her own grief to declare her incompetent, just as he had done to her mother, so he could seize her assets and her intellectual property. But Richard Hayes made a fatal calculation that night. He thought he was looking at a broken daughter. He didn't realize he was looking at an architect of revenge who had been studying his blueprints for years. He had just handed her the motivation to burn his entire legacy to the ground. Before we dive into this explosive tale of betrayal and justice, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on your notifications now, because you will not want to miss the moment Jasmine transforms her stepfather's blackmail into the match that ignites his destruction. Jasmine Reeves sat in the center of the silent glass empire she had helped build, the city of Atlanta sprawling out beneath her like a grid of electric gold. It was 2 a.m, a time when the Hayes Development Tower was usually nothing more than a hollow monument to capitalism. But for Jasmine, this was the golden hour. The silence was not empty. It was heavy with the potential of her latest masterpiece, the Heritage District proposal. For 5 years, she had served as the brilliant, tireless engine behind the Hayes family fortune, taking the real estate firm from a stagnant regional player to a national powerhouse. She had done it all while navigating the shark-infested waters of a board of directors that saw her not as a visionary, but as the stepdaughter, the diversity hire, the outsider who had merely married into the name. They did not know that she was the one correcting the structural flaws in their deals. They did not know that she was the one saving them from bankruptcy 3 times over. She pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to massage away a headache that had been throbbing behind her eyes for days. On her desk lay the final blueprints for the Heritage District. It was more than a real estate deal. It was a resurrection. It was a plan to revitalize the historic Black neighborhood where her mother had grown up, protecting the legacy residents while bringing in sustainable commerce. It was the promise she had whispered to her mother's headstone 3 years ago. Jasmine reached for her coffee mug, but her hand froze. The air in the executive suite had changed. It wasn't a noise exactly. It was a shift in pressure, the subtle displacement of air that happens when a heavy door is opened and closed with practiced, predatory silence. Jasmine spun her chair around, her heart hammering a sudden, violent rhythm against her ribs. She expected to see a security guard making the rounds, perhaps looking for a forgotten light switch. Instead, she saw the silhouette of a man standing by the entrance to her private office suite. The hallway lights cast his shadow long across the plush carpet, stretching toward her like a dark finger. He stepped into the dim light of her office, and the familiarity of his face made the intrusion infinitely more terrifying. It was Richard Hayes, her stepfather, the CEO. The man who had walked her mother down the aisle 20 years ago with a smile that charmed the entire congregation, concealing the monster that lived beneath the tailored suit. "You're working late, Jasmine," Richard said. His voice was calm, velvety, and completely devoid of warmth. It was the voice he used during hostile takeovers. He walked further into the room, his movements slow and deliberate, like a man inspecting property he already owned. He was not wearing his usual office attire. He was wearing a tuxedo, likely returning from the mayor's gala, a black tie event Jasmine had been pointedly excluded from this year. He looked immaculate, a silver-haired lion who had just finished a satisfying meal. "I am finishing the heritage proposal, Richard," Jasmine replied, her voice steady despite the cold knot tightening in her stomach. "The board vote is tomorrow morning. I needed to ensure the financial projections were airtight." She made to stand up, instinct telling her that sitting down put her at a disadvantage, but Richard raised a hand. It was a small gesture, a gentle pat of the air, but it carried the weight of a command. "Sit down, Jasmine," he said softly. "You look exhausted, truly exhausted." He walked past the seating area and moved behind her desk. This was a violation of the highest order. In the corporate world, the space behind a desk is sacred ground. By walking behind her, he was asserting dominance. He was telling her that she was a guest in her own office. Jasmine swiveled her chair to face him, her muscles tensed, ready to run or fight. He wasn't looking at the blueprints. He wasn't looking at the screens. He was looking at her personal drawer, the one drawer she kept locked. The lock, she realized with a sinking horror, had been picked. The mechanism was visibly twisted, the wood splintered ever so slightly around the brass fitting. Richard reached into the drawer. He didn't rummage. He knew exactly what was there. His hand emerged holding a small, worn book bound in crushed purple velvet. Jasmine felt the breath leave her body as if she had been punched. It was her journal. It was the only place in the world where she was not the perfect executive. It was the repository of her grief, her rage, and the terrifyingly detailed timeline of her mother's decline. It contained the transcripts of arguments she had overheard, the dates Richard had manipulated her mother's medication, and the gaslighting sessions where he convinced a healthy woman she was losing her mind. "I was looking for a pen," Richard lied smoothly, the corners of his mouth twitching with a cruel amusement. "And I found this. I couldn't help but be concerned, Jasmine. A journal, in the office, it seemed unprofessional." He opened the book. The sound of the stiff pages turning was loud in the silence. He didn't read it like a snooping parent, he read it like a lawyer reviewing evidence. He ran a manicured finger down a page Jasmine recognized instantly. It was the entry from the night her mother died, written in shaky, tear-stained handwriting, detailing how Richard had delayed calling the ambulance by 20 critical minutes. "Please give that back," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That is private. It has nothing to do with the company." Richard looked up, closing the book with a soft, final thud. He tapped the cover with his index finger. "On the contrary, my dear, it has everything to do with the company. You see, I have been reading this for the past 20 minutes while you were in the restroom, and I must say the contents are deeply disturbing." He walked around the desk and leaned against the edge, towering over her. Paranoia, delusions of persecution. Obsessive theories about family conspiracies. Jasmine, reading this breaks my heart. It sounds exactly like your mother before the end. The comparison was a calculated dagger. Richard knew that Jasmine's greatest fear was becoming the tragedy her mother became. He was using her trauma to paint a portrait of hereditary madness. "I am not my mother," Jasmine said, her voice hardening. "And those are not delusions. Those are facts. You isolated her. You controlled her finances. And now you are standing in my office at 2 in the morning holding my personal property." Richard sighed, a sound of fake paternal disappointment. "See, this aggression, this hysteria, it is exactly what the board is worried about." He stood up straight and buttoned his tuxedo jacket. "I have already spoken to the executive committee, Jasmine. We agreed that the pressure of the Heritage District is triggering a mental health crisis for you. We cannot have a woman in your condition managing a $100 million portfolio. It is a liability." "You are stealing the project," Jasmine realized aloud. The puzzle pieces slammed together in her mind. This wasn't about her mental health. It was about the land. The Heritage District sat on soil that had suddenly tripled in value due to a new city zoning law Richard had likely lobbied for in secret. He didn't want a community revival project. He wanted to bulldoze it for luxury high-rises, and he couldn't do that while Jasmine controlled the trust. "I am saving the family legacy from an unstable heir," Richard corrected her. He slipped the purple journal into the inside pocket of his tuxedo. "I will be keeping this. Think of it as insurance. If you try to fight the board's decision, if you try to go to the press, or if you try to launch any of your ridiculous lawsuits. This journal becomes public record." He leaned in close, his cologne smelling of expensive musk and old brutality. "Imagine the headlines, Jasmine. Daughter of tragedy spirals into madness. We will have you declared incompetent just like we did her. You will lose your license, your reputation, and your freedom." Jasmine stared at him. A scream built in her throat, a primal desire to snatch the book back, to claw at his smug face. But she forced it down. She forced her breathing to slow. She remembered the lesson her mother had learned too late. Richard Hayes thrived on emotion. He fed on tears. If she reacted now, she would only confirm his narrative. She needed to be stone. She needed to be the silence he didn't expect. "I understand," Jasmine said, 2 words, flat, devoid of affect. Richard blinked. He had expected begging. He had expected a tantrum. The lack of reaction seemed to unsettle him for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered his arrogance. "Good. I have deactivated your key card. Security will escort you out. Take your personal effects. Leave the blueprints." Jasmine stood up. She picked up her purse. She did not look at the blueprints for the Heritage District. She did not look at the empty space on the desk where her journal had been. She looked Richard Hayes directly in the eyes. "You have the building, Richard," she said softly. "I have everything, Jasmine," he replied with a smirk. Jasmine walked out of the office. She walked past the elevators and down the long, glass-walled corridor. She didn't look back. Her heels clicked a steady, rhythmic cadence on the marble floor, a sound that echoed like a war drum in the empty tower. She reached the lobby, nodded to the confused night guard, and pushed through the revolving doors into the cool Atlanta night. The humidity wrapped around her, heavy and thick. She walked to her car, her hands trembling so violently she dropped her keys twice before unlocking the door. She sat in the driver's seat, the darkness of the car acting as a cocoon. The tears finally came, hot and stinging, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon violence. He had stripped her naked. He had taken her armor. He had weaponized her deepest pain. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. He thought he had won. He thought that by taking the journal, he had taken her power. But as the tears dried, a cold, hard clarity settled over Jasmine's mind. Richard had made a mistake. By admitting he read the journal, by admitting he knew what he had done to her mother, he had confirmed everything Jasmine had ever suspected. He had removed the doubt. He wasn't just a bad businessman, he was a criminal, and he had underestimated one critical thing. Jasmine Reeves was not her mother. Her mother had been kind, trusting, and soft. Jasmine was forged in the fire of that betrayal. She reached into her glove compartment and pulled out a small, encrypted burner phone she had bought 3 months ago, acting on a gut feeling she hadn't wanted to acknowledge until now. She dialed a number she had memorized but never called. It rang 4 times. A woman's voice answered. It was rough, aged like cured tobacco, and suspicious. "Who is this? No one has this number." "Aunt Viola," Jasmine said, her voice devoid of the fear she had felt 10 minutes ago. "It's Jasmine," he did it. He made his move. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the voice spoke again, sounding not like an old woman, but like a general waking up for battle. "Did he take the book?" "Yes," Jasmine replied. "Good," Viola said. "Then he thinks he's safe. Come to the house, Jasmine. It's time I showed you what really lies underneath the Hayes empire. Bring your laptop. We aren't going to sue him. We are going to bury him." Jasmine started the engine. The engine roared to life, a growl that matched the fury building in her chest. She pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the glass tower behind in her rearview mirror. Richard Hayes held her secret, but he didn't realize that secrets were like landmines. They didn't just hurt the person hiding them, they destroyed the person who stepped on them. The war for the legacy had just begun. The drive from the gleaming glass towers of Buckhead to the shadowed, forgotten streets of Vine City was less than 10 miles. But for Jasmine Reeves, it felt like crossing into a different century. The luxury sedan, a parting gift from the company she no longer ran, glided silently over the wet asphalt. The rain had started to fall in earnest, a heavy, rhythmic deluge that blurred the world outside into streaks of charcoal and silver. Jasmine drove with mechanical precision, her eyes checking the rearview mirror every 30 seconds. Paranoia was no longer a symptom of the madness Richard accused her of. It was now a necessary survival skill. She wasn't being followed, at least not yet. Richard was likely too busy toasting his victory with aged scotch to realize that his stepdaughter hadn't gone home to cry. She had gone to the one place in Atlanta he was afraid to enter. She turned off the main avenue onto a street lined with massive oak trees, their branches creating a tunnel that blocked out the orange glow of the city's streetlights. This was the neighborhood where the Hayes fortune had truly begun, not in a boardroom, but on the front porches of families who had been swindled out of their deeds decades ago. Jasmine pulled up to a house that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. It was a sprawling Victorian structure, painted a deep, defiant navy blue, surrounded by a wrought iron fence that was rusted but imposing. This was the home of Viola Davis, not the actress, but the Aunt Jasmine had been forbidden to speak to for 15 years. Viola was her mother's older sister, the woman Richard had painted as a bitter, jealous failure. "She wanted what we have," Richard used to tell a young Jasmine. "She hates us because we succeeded." Jasmine killed the engine and sat in the silence for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. She was about to find out if Richard's version of history was just another one of his meticulously crafted lies. She stepped out of the car, ignoring the rain that instantly soaked her silk blouse, and walked to the heavy oak door. She didn't knock. She knew Viola. Viola would have been watching the street since the phone call ended. The door swung open before Jasmine could lift her hand. Viola stood in the threshold, framed by the warm, yellow light of the hallway. She was a striking woman, tall and angular, wearing a simple housecoat that looked like royal robes on her frame. Her hair was completely white, braided into a crown around her head, and her eyes were the exact same shade of amber as Jasmine's mother's had been. But where her mother's eyes had always held a soft, pleading look, Viola's eyes were hard flint. "You look like hell, girl," Viola said, her voice rough but steady. She didn't offer a hug. She stepped aside, a silent invitation to enter the sanctuary. Jasmine stepped inside, the smell of the house hitting her instantly. It smelled of sage, old paper, and lemon oil, the scent of memory. "He fired me, Aunt V," Jasmine said, the confession tumbling out before she could stop it. "He took the journal. He's going to use it to certify me." "I know what he's going to do," Viola said, closing the heavy door and engaging 3 separate deadbolts with loud metallic clicks. "He follows a script, Jasmine. Men like Richard Hayes don't have imagination. They have a playbook. He did the exact same thing to your grandmother in 1998. Jasmine froze in the hallway. "Grandmother. Mom told me grandmother sold the land willingly to pay for medical bills." Viola laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged hallway. "Your mother told you what she had to tell you to survive in his house. Come, we have work to do, and I don't have time for you to be naive." Viola led her into the dining room. It had been converted into a chaotic command center. The large mahogany table was buried under stacks of yellowing paper, maps, legal deeds, and a modern, humming server tower that looked out of place among the antiques. Jasmine realized with a jolt that Viola hadn't just been sitting here in exile. She had been waiting. Had been preparing. "Sit," Viola commanded, pointing to a chair cleared of debris. She walked to a sidebar and poured 2 glasses of dark, amber liquid. She slid one across the table to Jasmine. "Drink, it's bourbon. It'll burn the fear out of your throat." Jasmine took a sip. It tasted like fire and oak. She set the glass down. "He has the Heritage District, Viola. The vote is tomorrow. Once the board approves it, he breaks ground. He's going to bulldoze everything within 4 blocks of this house." "He thinks he has the Heritage District," Viola corrected, picking up a rolled-up map and unfurling it across the table. It was an old surveyor's map of Atlanta, dated 1965. But Richard has always had a problem with the fine print. She tapped a specific plot of land shaded in red. "This is the land he claims he owns, the land he married your mother to get control of." "He married her for love," Jasmine said weakly, the old programming still fighting against the new reality. "He loved her in the beginning. He married her because the deed to this land had a matriarchal clause," Viola said sharply. "Your grandmother was smart. She knew developers were circling like buzzards. She put the core 40 acres, the heart of what is now the Hayes Empire, into a trust that could only be transferred through the female line. Richard couldn't buy it. He couldn't steal it, so he had to marry it." Jasmine stared at the map, the room spinning slightly. "So he married Mom. To get control of the trust. He married her, he isolated her, and then he convinced her to sign over management rights as her husband," Viola explained, her finger tracing the red line. "But here is the secret he thinks is buried. Management rights are not ownership. When your mother died, the ownership didn't pass to him. It passed to the next female heir." Jasmine looked up, her eyes widening. "Me, you," Viola confirmed. "But there is a catch. The deed stipulates that if the heir is declared mentally or legally incompetent, the control reverts to the court-appointed guardian, which would be Richard." The silence in the room was absolute. The rain outside was just a distant hum now. The horror of Richard's plan was fully illuminated. He hadn't stolen the journal just to embarrass her or fire her. He had stolen it to legally bypass the deed restriction. He needed Jasmine to be crazy, or he didn't really own the land he was about to build a billion-dollar project on. "He played the long game," Jasmine whispered, a cold fury replacing the shock. "He waited 20 years for this moment." "He is a patient devil," Viola agreed. "But he is arrogant. He thinks because he has the journal, he has the winning hand. He doesn't know about the shadow ledger. The what? Jasmine asked. Viola moved to a stack of papers and pulled out a grainy black and white photograph. It showed a young Richard Hayes standing next to a man Jasmine didn't recognize, a man with a sharp, hungry face. This is Richard 30 years ago, and this man is Marcus Thorne, his old accountant. Thorne died in prison for tax fraud, but before he went away, he sent me a letter. He told me that Richard keeps 2 sets of books. The official books that he shows the IRS and the shareholders and the shadow ledger. The real money, Jasmine realized. The bribes, the kickbacks, the offshore accounts where he hides the profits he stole from your mother's trust, Viola said. Thorne told me the ledger exists, but he didn't tell me where it is. If we find that ledger, Jasmine, we don't just stop the development. We prove that Richard has been embezzling from the trust for 2 decades. We send him to federal prison. Jasmine looked at the cluttered table, the map, the old photo. It was overwhelming. She was a real estate developer, not a detective. Viola, I don't know where he keeps it. He's paranoid. His office is a fortress, and I can't go back there. Security will arrest me on sight. You can't go back, Viola said, her eyes gleaming with strategy. But someone else is already inside, someone who hates him almost as much as we do. Jasmine frowned, racking her brain. Who? Richard surrounded himself with sycophants and paid allies. There's no one. The board eats out of his hand. The VP is his golf buddy. Think deeper, Jasmine, Viola urged. Who is the one person Richard treats worse than he treated your mother? Who is the ghost in that glass tower? The realization hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Elias Hayes, Richard's biological son from his first marriage. The disappointment. Elias was brilliant with numbers, a forensic accountant by trade, but Richard had relegated him to the basement of the corporate hierarchy, mocking him publicly for his lack of killer instinct. Elias worked in the compliance department, a glorified paper pusher in his father's eyes. Jasmine hadn't spoken to him in months, but she remembered the look in his eyes at the last company Christmas party. It was the look of a dog that had been kicked one too many times. Elias knows where the bodies are buried because Richard makes him dig the graves, Viola said. Richard forces Elias to sign off on the fake audits. If Richard goes down, Elias goes down with him, unless we offer him a lifeline. Jasmine stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, wet street. You want me to turn his son against him? I want you to offer his son a chance to be free, Viola corrected. Richard holds Elias hostage with debt and guilt. You offer him the one thing Richard never will, respect, and a share of the new company. Jasmine turned back to the table. She looked at the map of the land her grandmother had fought to keep. She thought of her mother fading away in that big, cold house, convinced she was losing her mind when she was really just losing her freedom. She thought of Richard's smirk as he held her journal. Okay, Jasmine said, her voice steady. We need the ledger, but we need more than that. We need to humiliate him. I want to destroy his reputation before we destroy his freedom. Now you're talking like a Reeves, Viola said, pouring herself a drink. So, what is the plan? Jasmine walked back to the table and placed her hand on the map. Her mind, trained in the brutal arena of high-stakes development, began to assemble the pieces. The groundbreaking ceremony is in 4 days. The gala, the press will be there, the investors, the mayor. A perfect stage, Viola mused. We need the ledger by then, Jasmine said. But we also need to distract him. If Richard thinks he's won, he'll get sloppy. We need to give him a victory so big he stops watching his back. A bait, Viola said, smiling for the first time. It was a terrifying smile. I'm going to draft a fake survey, Jasmine said, the plan forming rapidly. There's a parcel of land adjacent to the Heritage District, the marshlands. It's toxic, unstable soil, totally worthless. but I can create a geological report that makes it look like it's sitting on a massive aquifer of clean water, liquid gold for a developer. And you leak it to him. I leak it to him through Elias, Jasmine said. We make Richard think he's stealing one last great deal from me before he kicks me out. He'll leverage the company's liquidity to buy that swamp. And when he does, he'll be cash poor exactly when we expose the ledger. Viola raised her glass. The poisoned land deal. Your grandmother would be proud. Jasmine didn't smile. She'll be proud when the name on the building is Reeves, not Hayes. She pulled out her phone. I'm going to text Elias. We meet him tonight. Tonight? Viola asked. It's 3 a.m. Richard is asleep, Jasmine said, grabbing her coat. The monsters are sleeping. That means it's time for the ghosts to wake up. The two women stood in the dimly lit dining room, 2 generations of exiled daughters plotting the fall of a king. The rain outside had stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and expectant. Jasmine felt a shift inside her chest. The heartbreak of the last few hours was gone, cauterized by the heat of the plan. She wasn't the victim in the journal anymore. She was the author of the next chapter. One more thing, Jasmine, Viola said as they moved toward the door. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a velvet cloth. She handed it to Jasmine. Jasmine unwrapped it. It was an old, heavy iron key. What is this? That, Viola said, is the key to the original safe deposit box your grandmother opened at First City Bank. Richard thinks he closed all her accounts. He missed one. I don't know what's in there, but I know she hid it the week before she died. If we can't find the ledger in the office, the map to it might be in that box. Jasmine closed her hand around the cold iron. It felt like a handshake from the past. We'll find it, she promised. They walked out into the cool night air. The city of Atlanta slept, unaware that a civil war had just been declared in its darkest corners. Jasmine got back into her car, but this time she wasn't driving away from something. She was driving toward the fight. She looked at the phone in her lap, composed a message to Elias, and pressed send. I know about the shadow ledger. Meet me at the Waffle House on Piedmont in 30 minutes. Come alone or go to prison with him. It was a gamble. Elias could run straight to his father. But Jasmine was betting on the one thing Richard Hayes never understood, the resentment of a child who had been used as a tool. She put the car in gear. The silence of the night was about to be broken. The Waffle House on Piedmont Avenue was a beacon of yellow light cutting through the relentless Atlanta rain. It was 3:30 in the morning, an hour when the city belonged to truck drivers, insomniacs, and people with nowhere else to go. Jasmine Reeves sat in a booth near the back, her back to the wall, nursing a black coffee that had long since gone cold. She watched the door. Every set of headlights that swept across the parking lot made her stomach tight. She was gambling everything on a text message sent to a man who had spent his entire life afraid of his own shadow. Elias Hayes was not a brave man. Jasmine knew this. He was a creature of habit and obedience, beaten into submission by a father who viewed affection as a weakness. If Elias had shown the text to Richard, the police would be here any minute to arrest Jasmine for corporate espionage or harassment. She checked her watch. 3:32. He was late, or he wasn't coming. Just as she began to slide out of the booth to leave, the glass door pushed open. The little bell above it chimed softly, announcing the arrival of a figure who looked like he had dressed in the dark. Elias Hayes stood in the entryway, dripping wet. He wore a trench coat over pajamas and expensive loafers that were being ruined by the slush. He scanned the room with wide, terrified eyes until they landed on Jasmine. He hesitated, looking back at the door as if checking for a pursuit team before hurrying over to her booth. He slid into the seat opposite her, keeping his head low. He looked older than 35. His hairline was receding, and there were deep, dark circles carved under his eyes. He didn't say hello. He leaned across the sticky table and hissed, Are you insane? If he finds out I am here, Jasmine, he won't just fire me, he will destroy me. He is already destroying you, Elias, Jasmine said calmly. She didn't flinch at his panic, she needed to be the anchor. He just hasn't finished the job yet. Elias wiped rain from his face with a trembling hand. You said you know about the shadow ledger. That is a myth, office gossip. It is not a myth, Jasmine countered, locking eyes with him. And you know it isn't because you are the one who signs the compliance forms that cover the tracks. I spoke to Aunt Viola. The name hit Elias like a physical slap. He recoiled against the vinyl booth. Viola, she's a ghost. She's been gone for decades. She's been watching, Jasmine said. She knows about the double books. She knows about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. And she knows that Richard has set you up as the fall guy. Jasmine leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a whisper that barely rose above the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Think about it, Elias. Why are you the head of compliance? You're not a lawyer, you're not an executive, you are his son. When the IRS eventually knocks on the door, who is the signature on every single fraudulent document? It's not Richard's, it is yours. Elias stared at her. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. He had always known his father didn't respect him, but he had never let himself do the math on the legal liability. He told me it was a formality, Elias stammered, his voice breaking. He said he needed family in that role because he couldn't trust outsiders. He needs a scapegoat, Jasmine corrected ruthlessly. He fired me tonight, Elias. He stole my journal, and he is going to declare me incompetent to steal the land trust. Once he breaks ground on the Heritage District, he will have the cash flow to disappear, and when the audit happens, you will be the one in handcuffs while he is sipping wine in Tuscany. Elias put his head in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. It wasn't the reaction of a corporate conspirator, it was the collapse of a terrified child. I can't fight him, Jasmine. You don't know what he has on me. My gambling debts, the incident in college, he keeps a file. If I turn on him, he releases it all. Let him release it, Jasmine said, her voice hard. Let him tell the world you have debts. Better to be bankrupt and free than rich and in prison for federal fraud. I am offering you a way out, Elias. We are going to take the company back. The real company. The one my mother and your grandmother built. Elias looked up. A tiny spark of something, perhaps hate, perhaps hope, flickered in his eyes. What do you need? I need the ledger, Jasmine said. I need the physical proof of where the money is. Elias laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. You think it's a book, Jasmine, this is the 21st century. The shadow ledger is a terabyte of encrypted data. It lives on an air-gapped server in his private vault. It is biometric. Retina scan and voice print. Only Richard can open it. There has to be a backup, Jasmine insisted. Men like Richard never trust technology completely, they always keep a copy. There is no copy, Elias said, shaking his head, but there is a transfer window. Explain, Jasmine commanded. Elias looked around the diner again, checking for listeners. Once a year, Richard moves the funds. He cycles the money through the shell companies to make it look like charitable donations before tax season. He has to take the drive out of the vault and plug it into the main network to synchronize the accounts. For exactly 1 hour, the shadow ledger is online. When? Jasmine asked, holding her breath. The gala, Elias whispered. The groundbreaking gala. He does it during the speeches. He thinks it's the perfect cover because everyone is watching the stage and the security team is focused on the guests. He goes up to the penthouse, connects the drive, and executes the transfer while the mayor is shaking hands downstairs. Jasmine sat back, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was poetic. Richard's arrogance was his only vulnerability. He would be committing his greatest crime at the exact moment he was being celebrated as a hero. So we have 4 days, Jasmine calculated. We need to access the network during that hour and copy the drive. Impossible, Elias said. The penthouse is locked down, and even if you get in, you need his password. I don't need to get into the penthouse, Jasmine said, her mind racing back to the lessons Viola had taught her about the building's history. I just need to be on the same hardline network, and I know a way in. But to make this work, Elias, we need him distracted. We need him so focused on a new victory that he forgets to be paranoid. She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a thick blue folder. She slid it across the table to Elias. "What is this?" he asked, hesitating to touch it. "This is the bait," Jasmine said. "It is a geological survey for the marshlands, the property adjacent to the Heritage District." Elias frowned. "The marshlands? That place is a toxic sinkhole. Dad has been trying to block the city from zoning it for years." "Open it," Jasmine urged. Elias opened the folder. He scanned the summary page, his eyes widening as he read the fabricated data. This says there is a massive granite aquifer under the mud. Stable bedrock, clean water rights. It's a forgery, Jasmine admitted freely. "I created it 2 hours ago, but the stamps look real. The data looks real. If Richard thinks there is a gold mine next to his project, and if he thinks I hid this survey to keep it for myself, he will buy it," Elias finished the thought, a look of awe crossing his face. "He will leverage the company's liquidity to buy the land before you can claim it." "He is greedy, Jasmine. He can't resist a steal." "Exactly," Jasmine said. "I want you to plant this on his desk tomorrow morning. Tell him you found it in my outbox in a folder I tried to delete. Tell him I was trying to secure financing to buy it personally." Elias ran his hand over the folder. For the first time in his life, he held a weapon that could hurt his father. If he buys this, he drains the cash reserves. He'll be extended, vulnerable. "And when we expose the fraud at the gala," Jasmine added, "he won't have the liquid capital to pay the lawyers or the bribes. He will be broke, Elias, and you will be the whistleblower who helped the FBI." Elias closed the folder. He took a deep breath, and for a moment the trembling in his hands stopped. He looked at Jasmine, and she saw a resemblance to Richard, but without the cruelty. He was just a man who wanted to be free. "I'll do it," Elias said. "I'll plant the survey, but Jasmine, if this goes wrong, if he catches us—" "He won't catch us," Jasmine promised, though her own heart was racing. "Because he doesn't see us. To him, you are a disappointment and I am a crazy woman. He's fighting the versions of us he created in his head. He isn't ready for who we really are." Elias stood up. He tucked the blue folder under his trench coat, shielding it from the rain. "I'll see you at the gala, Jasmine. Good luck." He turned and walked out of the Waffle House, disappearing into the rainy night. Jasmine watched him go. She had her inside man. She had her bait. Now she just needed to figure out how to break into the most secure network in Atlanta without being seen. She finished her cold coffee and stood up. She needed to get back to Viola's. They had 4 days to plan a digital heist. As she walked to the door, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. Her corporate credit cards had just been canceled. Richard was moving fast. He was cutting off her oxygen. Jasmine smiled a cold, dangerous smile as she pushed open the door. "Cut it all off, Richard," she thought. "I don't need your money. I'm about to spend it all for you." The next morning, the sun rose over Atlanta with a deceptive brilliance. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a polished, innocent blue. Inside the Hayes Development Tower, however, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Richard Hayes sat in his office, the morning light reflecting off his silver hair. He was in a foul mood. The board had agreed to the competency hearing for Jasmine, but the legal paperwork was tedious. He hated details. He wanted results. There was a tentative knock on the door. "Enter," Richard barked, not looking up from his tablet. Elias walked in. He looked better than he had at the diner. He was shaved, dressed in a crisp suit, and holding a blue folder with a mixture of hesitation and urgency that Richard interpreted as fear of his father. "What is it, Elias?" Richard snapped. "I don't have time for compliance issues today." "It's not compliance, sir," Elias said, his voice trembling just the right amount. Well, security was scrubbing Jasmine's digital trash bin as you ordered. They found something she tried to permanently delete last night. I thought you should see it immediately." Richard looked up, his interest piqued. "Bring it here." Elias walked to the desk and placed the blue folder on the mahogany surface. He stepped back quickly as if afraid the desk might bite him. Richard opened the folder. He saw the title, Geological Survey Sector for the Marshlands. He scoffed. "Why was she looking at that swamp? We wrote that off years ago." "Read the summary, sir," Elias said softly. "Page 3. Richard flipped to page 3. His eyes scanned the text. "Subsurface granite shelf confirmed. Aquifer purity 99.8%. Estimated commercial water rights valuation, $40 million. Richard froze. He read it again. He looked at the date stamp. It was from a private survey company dated 2 days ago. Jasmine had commissioned this secretly. "She was hiding it," Richard whispered, a greedy light igniting in his eyes. She knew. She knew the land was valuable and she was going to buy it herself after I fired her. That ungrateful, treacherous little. He slammed the folder shut and hit the intercom button on his desk. "Get me legal, and get me the acquisitions department, now." He looked up at Elias, a rare expression of approval crossing his face. "You did well, Elias, very well. You caught her trying to steal from us." "Thank you, Father," Elias said, keeping his face neutral. "I just want to protect the company." "You can go," Richard dismissed him, already dialing his broker. "I need to make an offer on this land before noon." If Jasmine thinks she can outsmart me, she is even crazier than her mother. Elias walked out of the office, closing the heavy door behind him. He leaned against the wall in the corridor and let out a long, shaky breath. The bait was taken. The hook was set. Richard Hayes was about to spend $50 million on a pile of mud, and in 3 days at the gala, Jasmine Reeves would be there to watch him drown in it. The next 72 hours moved with the agonizing slowness of a burning fuse. For Richard Hayes, it was a victory lap. He moved through the Hayes Development Tower with the swagger of a man who had just conquered a new continent. He had drained the company's liquid cash reserves, nearly $55 million, to purchase the marshlands in an all-cash expedited deal. He believed he had snatched a goldmine from Jasmine's grasp. He didn't know he had just purchased a toxic anchor that would drag his financial ship to the bottom of the ocean. But the trap wasn't finished. Bankrupting him wasn't enough. Jasmine needed the evidence to lock him away. She needed the shadow ledger. On the morning of the gala, Jasmine stood in Aunt Viola's dining room, staring at the contents of the safe deposit box they had retrieved using the iron key. It wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It was a set of original architectural blueprints for the building that now bore the Hayes name. Viola smoothed the yellowed paper out on the table, her finger tracing a line that ran through the center of the structure like a spine. "Richard is a man of surfaces," Viola said, her voice low and focused. "When he renovated the tower 10 years ago, he installed biometric scanners, retina locks, and fiber optic cables. He wrapped the building in glass and steel to make it look modern, but he was too cheap to tear out the core." She tapped a narrow shaft drawn in faded blue ink that ran from the basement foundation all the way to the penthouse mechanical room. "This is the original service chase. It was designed for the old pneumatic tube system and heavy maintenance cabling. Richard simply walled it over with drywall and put a ficus plant in front of the access door in the lobby." Jasmine looked at the schematic. "And this shaft goes to the penthouse. Directly to the server room," Viola confirmed. "It bypasses the elevators. It bypasses the security desk. And most importantly, it bypasses the signal jammers he installed to prevent wireless hacking. If you can get into this shaft, you can hardline directly into the mainframe from behind the server rack. Jasmine looked at the blueprints, then at the sleek black dress hanging on the back of the door. It was a gown designed for a gala, but tonight it would be her camouflage. Elias said the transfer window is 1 hour. I have to be plugged in when he connects the drive. He will be distracted, Viola assured her. I have arranged for a little chaos of my own, but getting into that shaft is physical, Jasmine. It's dirty, it's tight, and if security catches you, there is no explaining it away. I'm not afraid of the dark, Aunt V, Jasmine said, rolling up the blueprints. I've been living in his shadow for 20 years. It's time I started using it. The Hayes Development Annual Gala was the crown jewel of the Atlanta social calendar. The lobby of the tower had been transformed into a palace of light and excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, champagne flowed like water, and the city's elite mingled in a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. A string quartet played softly in the corner, struggling to be heard over the roar of polite, expensive conversation. Richard Hayes stood at the center of the room, holding a flute of champagne, basking in the adoration of his peers. He looked regal. He had no idea that his bank accounts were dangerously low, or that the aquifer he had just bought was actually a bed of toxic sludge. He checked his watch. 8:15 p.m. In 45 minutes, he would go upstairs to take a call, connect his drive, and launder the year's stolen profits. He didn't notice the black sedan pulling up to the valet. He didn't see the woman who stepped out. Jasmine Reeves was not hiding. She wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that fit like a second skin, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She didn't look like a disgraced, unstable daughter. She looked like the owner of the building. She walked past the velvet rope. The security guard, a man named Miller who had known her for 5 years, hesitated. He looked at his clipboard, where her name was undoubtedly crossed out in red ink. "Good evening, Miller," Jasmine said, not stopping, her voice carrying the undeniable weight of authority. "If you check your earpiece, you'll find there is a perimeter breach at the loading dock. I suggest you handle that before Mr. Hayes realizes his catering trucks are being blocked." It was a lie, but it was a specific, confident lie. Miller touched his earpiece, looking confused, and in that split second of hesitation, Jasmine swept past him into the crowd. She didn't head for the bar. She didn't head for the elevators. She moved with purpose toward the far east wall of the lobby, near the restrooms, where a large, decorative ficus tree stood in a heavy ceramic pot. The lobby was crowded, which was exactly what she needed. The noise and the crushing density of bodies provided the perfect cover. She slipped behind the heavy foliage of the tree. There, hidden in the shadows of the leaves, was a panel in the wall that looked like smooth marble, but was actually a seamless door. Richard had done a good job hiding it, but he hadn't changed the lock. Jasmine reached into her clutch. She didn't pull out a lipstick. She pulled out the heavy, rusted iron key. Her hand trembled slightly as she fit it into the almost invisible keyhole disguised as a knot in the marble pattern. "Please work," she prayed. "Please let the mechanism be as old as the blueprints." She turned the key. There was a heavy, satisfying thunk of a tumbler falling into place. The panel clicked open. Jasmine slipped inside and pulled the door shut behind her. The noise of the party was instantly cut off, replaced by the smell of stale air, dust, and old grease. She was in the dark. She flicked on a small tactical flashlight. The space was narrow, a vertical tunnel of concrete and rusted pipes that stretched up into the blackness. A metal ladder was bolted to the wall. It looked treacherous. She took a deep breath, kicked off her expensive heels, leaving them at the base of the shaft, and began to climb. She had 40 floors to climb. She had 45 minutes. 30 floors up, Elias Hayes was sweating. He stood in the penthouse server room, a space chilled to a frigid 60 degrees to protect the banks of blinking blue lights. He was pacing. He had planted the folder. He had watched his father sign the check, but this was the hard part. The door to the server room opened. Richard Hayes walked in. He wasn't smiling anymore. The mask of the charming host had dropped, replaced by the cold, efficient face of the criminal. He carried a small, silver external hard drive. "Is the network secure?" Richard asked, not looking at his son. "Yes, sir," Elias said, his voice sounding thin in the cold air. "Traffic is rerouted. The tunnel is open for the transfer." "Good," Richard grunted. He walked to the main terminal. "Stand by the door, Elias. If anyone knocks, tell them I am on a secure call with the governor." No one enters. Richard plugged the drive into the terminal. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner. A green light swept over his palm. Identity confirmed. He leaned in for the retina scan. A red laser mapped his eye. Access granted. The screen flared to life, displaying rows of numbers that represented millions of dollars in stolen assets. Richard began the transfer sequence. The shadow ledger was online. Inside the wall, directly behind the server rack, Jasmine Reeves was clinging to the ladder with aching muscles. She could hear the hum of the servers through the drywall. She could hear her stepfather's voice. She checked the small device Viola had built for her, a signal interceptor designed to piggyback on the hardline connection. She needed to drill a hole, a small, tiny hole through the drywall to feed the fiber optic wire through. She pulled out a silent, hand-cranked drill. She pressed it against the back of the wall. She began to turn, scritch, scritch, scritch. Inside the room, Richard froze. What was that? Elias' heart stopped. He had heard it too, a scratching sound coming from behind the main server bank. It's probably the cooling fans, sir," Elias stammered. "The bearings get loud when the load increases." Richard narrowed his eyes. He paused his typing. He tilted his head, listening. "That doesn't sound like a fan, that sounds like a rat." He stepped away from the terminal. He walked toward the back of the room, toward the wall where Jasmine was hiding. "Sir, the transfer," Elias shouted, desperate to distract him. "The window is closing. If you don't execute now, the encryption key resets." Richard stopped. He looked at the timer on the screen, 4 minutes remaining. He looked at the wall, then back at the money. Greed won. It always won. "I'll call exterminators tomorrow," Richard muttered. He went back to the console and hit execute. Behind the wall, Jasmine pushed the wire through the tiny hole. She connected it to the exposed port on the back of the server rack. Her handheld screen lit up. Connection established. Data stream detected. Copying. Jasmine watched the progress bar. 10%, 20%. She was stealing the shadow ledger in real time. She was draining the secrets right out from under his fingertips. Downstairs in the ballroom, the string quartet stopped playing. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. It was time for the speech. Richard Hayes unplugged his drive, pocketed it, and smiled at Elias. "Done," Richard said. "Another year, another fortune secured. Let's go downstairs, son. It's time for my applause." Richard walked out of the room. Elias lingered for a second, looking at the blank wall behind the servers. He whispered a silent thank you to the ghost in the machine and followed his father. Jasmine hung on the ladder, watching her screen. Download complete. She had the ledger. She had the proof. But now came the hardest part. She had to get back down, get out of the wall, and walk into that ballroom to face him before he left the building. She put her shoes back on at the bottom of the shaft, smoothed her dress, and pushed the marble panel open. The lobby was empty. Everyone was in the ballroom for the speech. Jasmine walked toward the double doors. She could hear Richard's voice booming over the speakers. "This building," Richard was saying, "is a testament to stability, to vision, to legacy." Jasmine pushed the doors open. The light from the ballroom hit her. She didn't stop. She walked right down the center aisle, a dark omen in a room full of light. The crowd parted. Heads turned. The murmuring started. Richard froze mid-sentence. He saw her. He saw the black dress. He saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't madness, it was judgment. Jasmine climbed the stairs to the stage. She didn't take the microphone from him. She simply stood next to him, pulled a small flash drive from her clutch, the copy she had just made, and held it up. "You're right, Richard," Jasmine said, her voice projecting clearly into the stunned silence of the room without a microphone. "This building is a testament to legacy, but you forgot whose legacy it actually is." She turned to the projectionist booth at the back of the room, where Viola had presumably already bribed the operator. "Play it," Jasmine commanded. The massive screen behind them, which displayed the Hayes logo, flickered. The logo disappeared. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared, then a bank transfer log, then a video clip, a recording from the security camera in the server room showing Richard plugging in the drive moments ago. The crowd gasped. Richard looked at the screen, then at Jasmine. His face went pale. The trap had snapped shut. The silence in the grand ballroom was heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. 300 of Atlanta's most powerful people stood frozen, their champagne flutes forgotten in their hands, staring at the massive projection screen behind the stage. The image was grainy but unmistakable. It was a security feed time stamped just 30 minutes ago, showing Richard Hayes, the man currently standing on stage in a tuxedo, plugging a silver drive into a server and initiating an unauthorized transfer of $12 million to an account in the Cayman Islands. The video looped, a digital echo of his crime playing over and over again. Richard Hayes stood center stage, the microphone still gripped tightly in his hand. His face, usually a mask of tanned, practiced charm, had drained of all color. He looked from the screen to Jasmine, who stood 5 feet away from him, looking not like a disruptor but like a judge. She was calm. Her breathing was steady. She was the only person in the room who wasn't in shock because she was the one who had written the script. "Turn it off," Richard bellowed, his voice cracking, losing its velvety composure. He gestured frantically to the tech booth at the back of the room. "Cut the feed. This is a fabrication, a deep fake." The feed did not cut. Instead, the image on the screen changed. It shifted from the video to a spreadsheet. It was a page from the shadow ledger Jasmine had just extracted from the wall. It listed years of bribes paid to city zoning officials, kickbacks from contractors, and most damning of all, the systematic draining of the Reeves family trust. The numbers were glowing in high-definition white against a black background, a wall of mathematical proof that Richard Hayes was not a tycoon, but a parasite. "It's not a fake, Richard," Jasmine said, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the silent room. She didn't need to shout. "It is the shadow ledger. The one you keep in the air-gapped server in the penthouse. The one you thought no one could touch." Richard turned on her, his eyes wild. He realized in that moment that the polite rules of society no longer applied. He was a drowning man, and he would drag anyone down to stay afloat. He reached into his tuxedo jacket. For a split second, the security team tensed, perhaps fearing a gun. But Richard pulled out something he believed was far more dangerous. He pulled out the purple velvet journal. "You want to talk about truth?" Richard hissed into the microphone, holding the book up like a preacher holding a Bible. "You want to listen to this woman? Look at who she is." He waved the book at the crowd. "This is her diary. This is the proof of her sickness. She stands here accusing me of fraud, but she is the one who hears voices. She is the one who inherited her mother's paranoia." The crowd murmured. Richard saw the hesitation in their eyes and pressed his advantage. He opened the book to a dog-eared page. "Listen to this. Listen to what she wrote on October 14th. He began to read, his voice dripping with mock pity. "The walls are listening. He is moving the money at night. I can hear the humming in the walls. I know he is poisoning the legacy." Richard slammed the book shut. "The humming in the walls, ladies and gentlemen, she is hallucinating. She is mentally incompetent, just like her mother was, and this stunt is nothing more than a psychotic break. Jasmine didn't flinch. She took a step closer to him. Read the date again, Richard. Richard blinked, thrown off by her lack of defense. What? October 14th, Jasmine repeated. I wrote that I heard humming in the walls. I wrote that you were moving the money. She pointed to the massive screen behind them. Look at line 402 on the spreadsheet. The audience turned their heads. Line 402 was highlighted. October 14th. 11:45 p.m. Wire transfer, $2.5 million. Source, maintenance reserve. Destination, Shell Corp Alpha. I wasn't hallucinating, Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. I was hearing the server cooling fans running at maximum capacity because you were stealing my mother's money. The humming wasn't in my head, Richard. It was in the penthouse. And I wasn't paranoid, I was observant. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The context of the journal had shifted instantly from evidence of madness to evidence of a crime witnessed by a daughter who had been gaslighted for years. Richard looked at the screen, then at the book in his hand. His weapon had just jammed. This is coincidental, Richard stammered, sweat now beading openly on his forehead. You doctored the files. Did I doctor the bank account? Jasmine asked. Because as of this morning, the Hayes Development operating account had a balance of $55 million, and as of noon today, that balance is zero. Richard straightened up, seeing a lifeline. That was a strategic acquisition, he announced, trying to regain his footing. I invested that capital in a game-changing asset. I secured the water rights to the marshlands, a property that will double the value of this company. He looked out at the investors. I made a bold move to secure our future. She is trying to paint it as theft because she is jealous that I outsmarted her. Jasmine smiled. It was the smile of the spider who feels the fly finally stop struggling. The marshlands, she said softly. You bought the marshlands based on a geological survey you found on my desk, a survey that claimed there was a granite aquifer full of pure water. It is a gold mine, Richard sneered. It is a toxic waste dump, Jasmine corrected him. She signaled the booth again. The screen changed. The spreadsheet vanished, replaced by the real original city survey of the marshlands. It showed layers of unstable mud, heavy metal contamination, and zero bedrock. I forged the aquifer report, Richard. I created a fake survey and planted it where I knew your spies would find it. I knew you were so greedy, so desperate to steal one last thing from me that you wouldn't do your due diligence. Richard froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had spent the entire company treasury, every liquid dollar, every bribe fund, every emergency reserve on a piece of land that was not only worthless but would cost millions to clean up. You baited me, Richard whispered, the microphone picking up the tremble in his voice. I bankrupted you, Jasmine declared. You are insolvent, Richard. You have no cash to pay your lawyers. You have no cash to pay off the zoning board. And you have no cash to run this building. Security, Richard screamed, losing all control. He pointed a shaking finger at Jasmine. Arrest her. She admitted to corporate sabotage. She admitted to fraud. Get her off my stage. The security guards moved forward uncertain. But before they could reach the stairs, the double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. The sound was like a gunshot. A woman walked in. She was leaning on a cane, but she moved with the force of a hurricane. Viola Davis wore a black suit that looked older than most of the people in the room, but she wore it with an elegance that money couldn't buy. She walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. Security will stand down, Viola commanded. Her voice was raspy, but it carried the undeniable ring of ownership. Who is that? Someone in the crowd whispered. That, Jasmine said from the stage, is Viola Davis, my mother's sister. The woman Richard erased from the company history because she knew where the bodies were buried. Richard looked at Viola as if he were seeing a ghost. "You," he breathed. "You're dead. You're supposed to be dead." "I'm very much alive, Richard," Viola said, reaching the base of the stage. She tossed a thick legal document onto the platform at his feet. "And so is the matriarchal clause." She turned to the audience. "This man," Viola gestured to Richard, "married my sister to control the land trust this building sits on. He thought that by driving her to her grave and driving her daughter to be declared incompetent, he could bypass the deed's restrictions. But he forgot one thing. The deed states that if the male guardian is found to be financially negligent or criminally liable, the trust does not revert to him. It reverts to the next blood kin." Viola looked up at Jasmine. "Jasmine Reeves has just proven, publicly and undeniably, that Richard Hayes is criminally liable. The land, the building, and whatever is left of the company, it all belongs to us." Richard looked around the room. He saw the faces of his allies turning away. He saw the mayor signaling to his aides to leave. He saw the investors pulling out their phones, likely calling their lawyers to sue him. His empire had evaporated in 10 minutes. "You can't do this," Richard muttered, backing away until he hit the podium. "I am the CEO. I built this tower." "You wrapped it in glass," Jasmine said, stepping into his personal space. "But you didn't build the foundation, and you certainly didn't protect it." From the side of the stage, another figure emerged from the shadows. It was Elias. He looked terrified, but he didn't stop walking. He walked past his father and stood next to Jasmine. "Elias." Richard asked, his voice sounding small and broken. "Elias, tell them I am the victim here." Elias looked at his father. He looked at the man who had bullied him, used him, and set him up to take the fall for decades. He took a deep breath. "I can't do that, Dad," Elias said into the microphone. "I have already given the FBI the encryption keys to the shadow ledger. They are waiting in the lobby." Richard Hayes collapsed. It wasn't a dramatic faint. It was a structural failure of the human spirit. His legs simply gave out, and he slid down the front of the podium, sitting on the stage in his expensive tuxedo, clutching the velvet journal like a life preserver. The sound of sirens began to wail outside, growing louder and louder, penetrating the glass walls of the tower. Blue and red lights began to flash against the windows, painting the ballroom in the colors of justice. Jasmine looked down at her stepfather. She didn't feel joy, she didn't feel happiness. She felt a profound, heavy sense of completion. The debt was paid. She reached down and gently pulled the purple journal from his loose grip. He didn't fight her. He just stared at the floor, muttering about the aquifer, about the money, about how it wasn't fair. Jasmine held the book to her chest. She looked at Viola, who gave her a sharp, proud nod. She looked at Elias, who was crying silently, but standing tall for the first time in his life. "It's over, Richard," Jasmine said softly. She turned and walked off the stage, leaving him there for the police. She walked through the silent crowd, past the shocked faces of the people who had ignored her for years. She walked out of the ballroom and into the lobby where a team of federal agents was rushing in. She pointed them toward the ballroom doors and kept walking. She walked out the front doors of the Hayes Development Tower into the cool night air. The rain had cleared completely. The stars were out. Jasmine Reeves took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air that finally, for the first time in 20 years, tasted free. The fall of Richard Hayes was not a slow decline, it was a demolition. In the 48 hours following the gala, the news cycle was dominated by the image of the silver-haired tycoon being led out of his own tower in handcuffs. The federal indictment was swift. The evidence Jasmine and Elias had provided was so comprehensive, a terabyte of financial DNA tracking every stolen dollar, that Richard's high-priced lawyers didn't even attempt a bail hearing. The poison land deal was the final nail in the coffin. Because Richard had used the company's last liquid assets to buy a toxic waste site, there was no money left to mount a defense. He was bankrupt, incarcerated, and utterly alone. 1 month later, the Atlanta skyline looked different. The massive letters spelling HAYES atop the glass tower were gone. In their place, cranes were hoisting new illuminated letters, REVES. Jasmine Reeves stood in the executive suite, the same office where Richard had tried to blackmail her. The room had been purged. The heavy mahogany furniture Richard favored was gone, replaced by sleek, modern oak and open light. The ficus tree hiding the secret door in the lobby had been removed and the wall sealed up. There would be no more secrets in this building. The door opened and Elias walked in. He looked different. The hunch in his shoulders was gone and the dark circles under his eyes had vanished. He was no longer the terrified son of a tyrant. He was the chief financial officer of the newly formed Reeves Heritage Group. "The board just finished the vote," Elias said, a genuine smile touching his face. "They approved the Heritage District zoning. We break ground on the community center next week." "Jasmine, we aren't bulldozing the neighborhood, we're renovating it." "And the toxic land?" Jasmine asked, turning from the window. "The city agreed to a Superfund cleanup grant," Elias explained. "Since we exposed the environmental hazard, they are paying for the remediation. It will take 10 years, but eventually it will be a park." Jasmine nodded. It was the perfect justice. The land Richard tried to use to destroy them would eventually become a place for children to play. "Thank you, Elias. For everything, you could have taken your share and left." "I had nowhere to go," Elias said simply. "This is the first time I've ever walked into this building without being afraid. I think I'd like to stay and see what it's like to work for a boss who doesn't keep a file on me." "You're not working for a boss, Elias," Jasmine corrected him. "You're working with family." Elias nodded, his throat tight with emotion, and excused himself to finalize the permits. Jasmine turned back to her desk. There was one final piece of business to attend to. Aunt Viola was sitting on the sofa in the corner, reviewing the guest list for the renaming ceremony. She looked regal, the true matriarch finally returned from exile. "He called from prison today," Viola said, not looking up from her papers. Jasmine froze. "Richard, he wanted to speak to you. He said he has a deal to offer. Information on competitors in exchange for money to pay his commissary." "What did you tell him?" Jasmine asked. Viola looked up, her amber eyes gleaming. "I told him that the Reeves family does not negotiate with terrorists, and I told him that his call privileges have been revoked by the warden. I have friends in low places too, Jasmine." Jasmine smiled. The fear that had once paralyzed her at the mention of Richard's name was gone. He was just a memory now, a ghost in a cage. Jasmine sat down at her desk. In the center of the clean surface lay the purple velvet journal. It was no longer a weapon. It was a testament. She opened it. The pages were filled with the history of her pain, the panic attacks, the grief, the confusion, but she didn't tear them out. She didn't burn the book. She picked up a pen and turned to the very last page, the page Richard had never reached. She wrote a final entry, her hand steady and strong. October 30th. "The debt is paid. The land is returned. The silence is broken. They called me unstable because I felt too much. They didn't realize that my emotions were not a weakness, they were a guidance system. I used my fear to find the cracks in his armor. I used my grief to fuel the engine of his destruction. The journal is closed. The ledger is balanced." She closed the book and placed it in the drawer, not the locked drawer, but the top drawer, right next to her pens and business cards. She didn't need to hide it anymore. Jasmine Reeves stood up and walked to the panoramic window. Below her, the city of Atlanta shined, alive and moving. She wasn't just a survivor of the Hayes legacy. She was the architect of her own. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, looking at her reflection. She looked like her mother. but mostly she looked like a queen who had just won the war. And that is where Jasmine Reeves' story ends. She proved that when a predator tries to corner a brilliant daughter, he better make sure she doesn't know how to use his own secrets as ammunition. Thank you for listening to this episode of Black Women's Soul Stories. Jasmine turned her trauma into a takeover, proving that the most dangerous thing in the boardroom is a woman who has nothing left to lose. If you enjoyed this story of justice and revenge, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments, if you found a journal of secrets that could destroy your enemy, would you use it? We'll see you in the next story.